Luka Varga, a 38-year-old man living in Sofia, Bulgaria, had always believed in the power of hard work and dedication. He was the kind of person who would show up early, stay late, and never complain about the hours. He had a quiet strength, a way of making people feel comfortable even when he wasn't speaking, and a heart full of loyalty to those who mattered. His days were spent in the factories of Sofia, where the air smelled of oil and metal and the machines hummed like a second heartbeat. He had a small apartment on the edge of the city where he shared a kitchen with his sister and a few close friends who knew him better than anyone else. He was not someone who talked much, but when he did, it was with purpose, with a steady voice that carried the weight of his words. Luca had always believed that if you worked hard enough, you could rise through the ranks, no matter where you started. He had grown up in a small town near Sofia where opportunities were scarce, and people who dared to dream were often the ones who made it. He had moved to Sofia in his early 20s with nothing but a suitcase and a determination to make something of himself. He had landed a job at a large manufacturing plant, where he started as a low-level technician and worked his way up through sheer persistence. He had been there for nearly 5 years, and by the time he was 30, he had become one of the most trusted people in the plant. He had a reputation for being reliable, for always showing up when he was needed, and for keeping his head down even when things got tough. But then, everything changed. It started with a new manager, a man who had been hired to bring in fresh ideas and a new way of thinking. At first, Luca had thought he was going to be a good fit, someone who would understand the challenges of the factory floor and work with the team to improve things. But it didn't take long for Luca to realize that this man was not the kind of leader he had hoped for. He was loud, brash, and had a way of making people feel like they were not good enough, even when they were. He would walk into meetings with his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the room for someone to criticize, and he would make it clear that he was the boss no matter what. Luca had tried to be patient to give the man a chance to prove himself. He had even offered his ideas, hoping that maybe the manager would see the value in them. But instead of listening, the man would take Luca's ideas and pass them on to someone else, as if Luca had never said them in the first place. He would make fun of Luca's suggestions in front of others, calling them naive or unrealistic, and would never give Luca the credit he deserved. It was like being in a play where you were the only one who knew the lines, but the director kept telling you to act like you didn't. Luca had tried to stay calm, to not let the man's words get to him. He had even tried to talk to the manager about it, hoping that maybe he could see that he was being unfair. But the man had just laughed and said, "You're not the kind of person who can lead a team, Luca. You're too quiet, too soft, you need to be more like me." Luca had left that meeting feeling like a piece of cardboard, something that could be easily thrown away. Then came the day that changed everything. It was the first of the month, and Luca had been working on a new line setup, the kind of project that required long hours and careful planning. He had been wrenching away, his hands calloused from years of work, his mind focused on the task at hand. But then something strange happened. He heard people being called into HR. He had never seen that before, and it made him uneasy. He had asked his coworkers what was going on, and they had just shrugged, not knowing either. But as he walked back to his cubicle, he saw one of the women from accounting crying, carrying a box of her things as she was escorted out of the building. Her name was called, and Luca's heart dropped to his stomach. He had never seen that kind of thing before. He had always thought that if you worked hard you would be safe, that your job would be there for you. But now it was clear that the company was changing and some people were being let go. He had been working so hard so long, and yet he had never received a bad review, never been put on a performance improvement plan. But somehow he had been chosen. The next morning, Luca was called into HR. He had been walking to his cubicle, his mind racing with questions, when he heard his name being called. He had thought, well, so much for dedication. He walked into HR and was told that his position was being eliminated. He had no job, no insurance, and only 4 months of pay for a job that had been his life for nearly 5 years. He had been destroyed. He had never seen anything like it before. He had been the one who had stayed late, who had worked hard, and yet he had been the one to be let go. He had been escorted back to his desk to pack up, his hands shaking, his heart pounding. His coworkers had been shocked, some of them even crying, but Luca had been too numb to feel anything. He had just sat there, staring at the empty desk, the empty chair, and the box of his things that he had to carry out. He had been told not to say anything to the manager, just to walk out, and he had done so, his face wet with tears, his mind a mess. The days that followed were a blur. He had tried to be strong, to not let the pain show, but it was hard. He had spent his birthday that day drinking with his best friends, trying to forget the pain, but it had only made it worse. He had felt like a failure, like he had been thrown away like trash, and he had no idea how to move forward. He had lost everything, and he had no idea where to go from there. He had spent the next month searching for a new job, working long hours at temp positions, trying to make ends meet. He had felt the weight of his loss, the emptiness that came with losing everything you had worked for. But then one day something changed. He had started a new job, one that he loved, where he felt like he could finally breathe again. He had found a new sense of purpose, a new way to live, and he had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would get better. But then one morning something unexpected happened. He had been working in the plant, and the plant director had called him into his office. The director was a man who had always been kind to Luca, someone who had seen his hard work and had always encouraged him. He had been walking into the office with a smile, thinking that maybe something good was about to happen. But when he walked in, the director looked up and said, "I have a resume for the plant manager position. You used to work at that fishing place, didn't you?" Luca had smiled, thinking that maybe the director had heard about his past and that maybe he had a chance to move up. But then the director had said something that made Luca's heart stop. He had said, "Did you know or work with douchehead manager?" Luca had nodded, thinking that maybe the director had heard about the manager's behavior and wanted to know if he had been a good or bad employee. But then the director had said something that made Luca feel like he had been hit with a hammer. How was he to work for or with? Luca had taken a deep breath, thinking about everything that had happened, about the betrayal, the injustice, and the pain. He had smiled and said, "He was an okay person, but he was a really great bus driver, if you get what I mean." The director had laughed, and then he had picked up the resume, looked at it, and then ripped it in half. He had thrown it away and said, "That's all I needed to know." Luca had stood there, his jaw dropped, his heart pounding, and for the first time in a long time he had felt something close to peace. He had taken his revenge, not with anger but with a quiet, steady strength that had been buried deep inside him all along. And in that moment, he had realized that he had not been the one who had been thrown away. He had been the one who had been waiting for his moment.